When you talk about planning, what's important first to take a step back and think about the project management body of knowledge. If you don't know that, the project management body of knowledge is the project management standard from the Project Management Institute. Project Management Institute is the biggest project management organization around the world. There's others, but the project management it's a big one. In the PMBOK 7 edition, so they arrange this in a different way, but they talk about project management principles, which are principles that you need to execute in all projects to make sure that you are going to be successful. But they also talk about something that they call project performance domains. And project performance domains are a group of related activities that are critical to make sure that a project can succeed. And those principles and performance domains, they need to be executed in any type of project, in any type of industry, following any type of work if you want to be successful. But why did I take this step back on the PMBOK before I talk about planning? Because planning is one of those project management performance domains. Planning is a requirement for any type of project. If you're using waterfall, if you're using a hybrid approach, if you're using a Scrum, if you're using Kanban, planning is always important there. Planning is always a requirement there. Of course, what's going to change is the planning effort that you're going to make, the point in time that you make the planning effort. For example, if you are using Scrum, you plan every sprint in the beginning of the sprint, but also you need to have a planning initiative to overlook the release of the project there. You need to have some bigger picture view there. If you are using waterfall, which I'm going to give you more examples of my projects and how I plan that, you invest in a lot of planning advance to do that. So planning is always important. Of course, regardless of the framework, planning is going to be different in different type of industries. I mentioned to you that I started working in engineering, procurement, construction industry. There, the project management would look like in a way. Then I talk about that I worked in the semiconductor industry. There, the project when I'm going to show you the project plan looks in a different way. For example, here, a project plan in a semiconductor industry has this type of phase here, where you have a concept, then you have a planning, then you do a design and you develop it, and then you create prototypes where you're going to move for a qualification there. This is also kind of the assembly, the manufacturing flow that very often you see in a semiconductor industry. Why I'm showing you that? Because then if you look for the automotive industry, where I mentioned to you that I develop products, but I also develop the supply chain, the phases of the project, they also look different there. For example, you have a plan and define phase, you have a product design and development phase, you have a process design and development phase, and you have a product process validation phase, and you have then a kind of release to production phase. Different types of phase where you have different type of deliverables, you have different gates that you need to have there. Why I'm saying you that to do you that again? Because of course the type of deliverables that I plan in the semiconductor industry, in the automotive industry, they are different. The type of project phase, they are different. The type of phase that I face in construction project that I mentioned, for example, they're different. There I had a kind of concept phase, a detailed design and planning phase. Then I moved to a construction phase. There was a procurement part, activity going parallel, to move to assembly and to move for commissioning. And by the way, this is the picture of a project that I executed in Brazil. One quite big project. This is called a substation, 550,000 volts. And this is what, of course, one picture from above, an overview there. What you can take from all those things that I'm showing to you here. Project phase are going to be different. Requirements for the project phase are different. And how to structure those phases, they are also different. The phases that you go through, they are different. So, of course, this is going to affect how you are going to plan something, how you are going to plan the different types of stuff that you do there. And of course, here I also give you some impression on how I had to adapt from going from this here, from this construction, from this automotive, from this semiconductor. I had to change and adapt quite a lot. So I had to learn different ways to plan. I learned different types of constraints, of course, which led me to develop this planning here. And in all those industries, of course, I use MS Project, of course, which helped me to excel with MS Project, but also to understand how the different features can be helpful and also can help you in the project execution there. So now you understand, you have a big overview on the planning, why its planning is relevant. You have a different overview how different planning phases can look for like in different types of projects. And here I'm presenting two examples. For example, in the program that I have here, the training that I have here, I put other examples there for that you can look in the different development phase. Because this is the first step to create this overview that you're going to need to execute a plan in a proper way. Because how you're going to plan something if you do not have even a good overview and what you're going to do here, what you overview in those phases, which kind of deliverables that you need to have, what are the steps that you need to take to move from one phase to another. This is very important for your planning there. So moving forward a bit, what's say you understand those project phases. Now you have a scope there, and you understand how this scope takes place in those different project phases. You need to create your plan itself, which is going to be you are going to take your deliverables, you are going to break down smaller tasks, you are going to connect those tasks based on dependencies they might have there to create a project plan and a schedule. And one of the most important things that you need to identify when you do that is to identify your critical path. So what's a critical path here? Here I'm trying to show visual. If you have task 1, task 2, and task 3, and task 4, what's the critical path from those tasks? It's task 1, 2, and 3, because they are those arrows here, they indicate dependencies there. That means that task 2 can only happen after task 1 is completed. Task 4 can only happen after task 1 is completed. The longest chain of execution is something is called the project critical path. This is a different way of how you can calculate that. That's also shown in different types of training. But what you need to understand, the critical path will determine the project duration. That's why it's so important. So if a task in the critical path delay, the entire project will be delayed. In this very simple example here, if task number 2 is delaying, the entire duration of this project, between brackets, of course, because these are only three tasks, it's going to be delayed. What happens if task 4 is delayed? Well, if task 4 is delayed in 50%, it still will be about the mid of task 3 here, just visually. And it's not impacting the project duration. That means the critical path also is going to define the priority of the task that you must execute there. So whatever type of project that you are executing, you need to understand what's a critical path there, because that will determine the project duration there. To show you also in a different visual, you can have a project with several durations there. There you are going to have a network, what's called a network diagram. That's a different view on how the different tasks can be connected there. And the longest duration task is going to be the critical path there. So very important for you to understand. So you have tasks that are part of the critical path. They're called a critical path activity or a critical path task. And you have the critical path method. That's how you identify this longest duration chain of tasks here. How is that relevant for practice? Let me give you an example of my experience here. This is one of the power substation that I executed in Brazil. Basically, this area, to put in a very simple way, we had an outside area here to construct there, and you had an inside area that's basically a building that we also have to construct there. The idea of this building that we would have something that in this image that we are going to put panels that would have the automation and the control of the substation, and the outside area looks like that, where you have the high voltage equipment there. Very simple. You don't need to understand. I just want to create a picture so you understand a bit there. What happened during the execution of this project? This project was being executed for a project manager in the company. So I think the project manager, he left the company at the time and they transferred this project to me. And in this project, we had a site manager that was quite for a long period in the company there. And he was always reporting that everything was fine with the project was on track. And the only problem in the project was the concrete structures that they go in the outside part here, like you can see here. So the first time I visited the substation there, I took out this picture here. And here you kind of can see part of the trays where we put the cables, but the outside picture without any of those structure here, because the concrete structures, they were delayed, they had a problem with the release, and so you could not move forward to assemble the concrete structure, the equipment and the cables and so on. But also when I visited, I noticed that the control building, the inside area that I mentioned to you, where we had to plan the control center of the substation with the panels, automations, computers, and everything else, was also quite delayed here. And what was the impact if this part was delayed? Well, usually to finalize the building takes much longer than to finalize the outside part. You can imagine once if you got the concrete structures ready there, it's just you put it in the base and you concreted the base, they were ready. So you kind of have a delay installing the equipment, but that's something that could be manageable. But if you delay the building, the automation that goes inside it could not be installed. And if you cannot install the automation, you are not going to be able to connect all the cables, you are not going to be able to commission and everything else. So this was the critical path of the project. And why I'm telling you this story there? Because when I talked with the site manager, he was saying, then I asked him, but the building is quite delayed there. And all this point you are mentioning that everything is okay, and the problem was the concrete structure that they were not here. And his justification was saying, yeah, but if the concrete structure they were here, we would also have been making sure that the building was on time. Here's the problem where a lot of people don't understand when we talk about the critical path. In this case, the concrete structure and the building itself, they had no relation. They had no dependency at all. Meaning that the progress on them, they were not related. So basically what he was telling me is that because something completely unrelated is delayed, I'm not, also the building is related. If I put in a very analogy there, it's just like if you go for if you talk, for example, I'm married, so I'm going to use an example. If your wife asks you why you did not pick up the kids in the school, or why you were late picking up the kids in the school, and then you suddenly come back and say, yeah, because it's dark outside. What does it being dark outside has to do with picking up the kids? They are not related. Although you can argue, oh, it's dark and what. You can go pick up the kids in the dark. Then that's probably not the best analogy here, but why I'm telling you this analogy? Because his entire discussion started, and then of course the first thing I happened in this project, I come back to the office, I report that this project is delayed, we have a big problem there, and the critical path is delayed, and we are going to delay the entire delivery there. And then of course there was a big discussion, escalation. The managers and the directors, they called the site manager and say, because he was working in the company for a long time, what's going on there? Why you did not tell us? And then he said the same thing. Well, because the concrete structures were delayed, so the building was the building was also delayed. They were not even interrelated. What's the entire problem with this discussion? The person did not understand the concept of a critical path. Because in practice, I've never seen a project being delayed. I've never seen a problem because if you say the theory, what I just presented to you, if you ask project manager or planner, most of them, they are going to say, okay, I understand what's the critical path. It's the longest chain of duration for a project. But they do not understand how they make this connection here in practice. And then where is the problem start? Because he simply did start delay the activities on the critical path and he blaming a completely unrelated task. Making a short story here, it was not nice. He ended up being reassigned for another project because I transferred him. So I cannot trust his report because whatever he's telling me, it's not the truth. And also that was part of that. Here also another important thing: if you're a planner or if you're a project manager, you need to visit your site. You need to understand what's going on site there. That's a good lesson also to not trust on your reports. But that's also a good lesson saying that how not understanding the critical path will create a very big impact in a project, and that can be something that you could have avoided. Maybe the project would have been delayed even though the site manager they escalated the situation. Yes, but if he was not reporting the right information, the right status of the project, of course people say what you are doing there. Your job is to make sure that the construction is on track, and if it's not, you need to report this back to us. And that was not what he was doing there. So keep that in mind. So in this situation that the project was delayed, we had to find ways how to compress our timeline. So that's also why I'm going to explain to you the two techniques how you can compress a timeline. One is called fast tracking and the one is called crashing. What's fast tracking? It's basically what you are going to do tasks that should happen in series, you're going to put them in parallel. So, for example, in the case of the house, ideally you want to have the house completed to install the panels. In this case, they were not fully complete. So what we did, we complete only the room here that we had for the house, and we start to install the equipment. And the rest of the house was still, they had to be painted, they had to finish everything. Sometimes they had to install windows and this kind of stuff. But the room where the panels had to go there, that was finished first. This is one example of fast tracking. What's important that you need to think into consideration? Both they have limitations. What's the limitation of fast tracking? First, you need to have different teams. Because if you try to, what do I mean by different teams? Different resources, different people. Because if you try to fast track something with the same team, it will not work. You're just going to add more tasks for them to do there. If they try to multitask, things will go even worse. So keep that in mind. So that's one of the things that we did, for example, in this case, to fast track stuff. What's the other thing that you can do? You can use crashing. What means crashing? You add additional resource to execute a task. Let me bring back to this example. Let's say in this case we had 10 people to complete the house, the building here. Well, I added 13 people because you can assume putting this in a visual, if you have more people working to a task, for example, task 1 had 2 people working, now I have 3 people working, and I'm going to reduce this from 3 to 2. So keep that in mind. What's the limitation of fast tracking? You have a limit of the number of people that you can add here. For example, if in the case of the house, from 10 people I add 15, can I do it a bit faster? Yes. What happened if 10 people I had 200 to build this house? Does it help? No. Because 200 is way too many. At some point, those people are just knocking heads there, and there are not going to be progress there. So crashing also has a limit. What's in a very nice terms, very nice analogy, it's what we call in Brazil kind of the maternity law. What does it mean? 9 women cannot have a baby in 1 month. So keep in mind that crashing has a limitation. At some point, just adding people there will not make any difference because those people, they are not even going to be able to help in that type of work that you need to execute there. What are other things, other limitations that you need to understand about fast tracking and crashing? Just because I added more people working the house does not mean that they are going to produce enough to be able to deliver. Different type of example. If you have to get someone on board, for example, in a design, the time that they are going to need to understand everything about the design, they're not going to produce anything, so they're not going to help to speed things up. So depending on the time of execution also, it makes sense. This is also one of the limitations that you need to have. For both fast tracking and crashing. There's risk involved with that one. What's the risk involved with the fast tracking? For example, if we say in the room, oh, something, let's make a very simple example. Let's assume they painted the walls in a different color there, in a wrong color. And we need to repaint this again after the panels are there. You can damage the equipment there. So that's a risk. You can have change that can impact what you are going to do next. What's the risk of crashing? If you add those people, you spend the money and you don't get what you have there. So keep in mind that you always have risks involved. And depending which phase that you are fast tracking, there can be more risks because earlier you do it, more open items that you're going to have in a project. That's why you have this curve here with earlier in a project, higher the amount of the risks, more you execute it, more you close it, because again, risk is about uncertainty. More uncertainties you have, more risks that you're going to have. And if you have a lot of uncertainties, you start to do things in parallel that should have been done sequentially. The chances are that you might need to change stuff, and that also, of course, will impact in the work that you already performed there. So keep that in mind. So this is crucial, and that can be used in any type of work. What's the challenge that you see there? I've already mentioned that a lot of people, they do not understand in a proper way, and they try to overcome those type of challenges in a planning, to be a better project manager, to be a better planner, to try to work more. But what's the problem with that? Because working extra hours won't make you a better project manager or make you a better planner. They're not going to make you more effective. They're not going to make you more efficient. But being more efficient will make you a better planner